Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I know we've got a global audience today. Have a global panel as well. I'm joined today by Thorsten Heller from GE Vernova and Pat Lowe from Microsoft. And I'll ask them to introduce themselves a bit more in just a second here, but just to let everybody know what we have planned for today. So we're going to have a conversation. It's a conversation I'm very excited to get to be a part of. And we're going to talk about how data and AI are shaping the utility industry, how GE Vernova and Microsoft are partnering to solve data challenges for our customers in the space. And we'll get specifically into the GridOS data fabric and the integration that we've built with Microsoft Fabric and how that integration can help customers solve problems. So we've got a great conversation here planned for you today. Feel free to chime in with questions. We will try to make this interactive. And yeah, to get things started, Pat, be great if you could introduce a little bit more about yourself, your background, and a little bit about why you think this conversation and why utilities data strategy is so critical in today's day and age.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks, GE Vernova, for having Microsoft as your guest here. I think this was a webinar a long time coming. But just give you a bit of my background. I am America's power utility leader here at Microsoft. What that really means is, in this world of AI, in this world of technology and data, Microsoft, we have just very, very good products and solutions here. But where my headspace is at is how do we take them and how do we actually solve power and utility problems? How do we improve the safety and safe fees? How do we bring down OpEx? Most importantly, how do we actually empower every single employee in an organization with data? If you kind of think about the traditional way of doing things, and I told this story before, and I'll tell it again. The day that I almost wanted to quit my job was when I reached the very last line of an Excel file. And those days with technology right now, we're actually way beyond this now. We can just get data to who needs it to make decisions sooner than later. So what my job really here is to take business problems and see how Microsoft technologies can leverage it. The other thing too, I'm really focused in is partnerships. We got an amazing ecosystem of partners. GE Vernova is one of the most important partners to us. And my role here is to collaborate the brilliant people at GE Vernova to how do we unlock more? How do we do more together just to really solve those utility problems? 20 years in the industry, I've done almost everything in the sun, was a SCADA engineer. My very first job was actually programming GE Vernova D6D relays. So, if you ever want to put up those settings as well, I'll figure out how to do that live on the webinar, but let's not make this a challenge. Just using my industry background and working with all the utilities out there too. It's really my pleasure to be on this webinar too and have a conversation with both of you, Robin, and both of you, Thorsten. So over to you, Thorsten.
Great meeting you. Thanks for having me. By the way, I think most of the people in the attendees know me. I'm heading innovation for the grid software business. And before I joined GE Vernova, I was CEO and one of the co-founders in a data integration company called Greenworld Integration Technology. And GE Vernova acquired us about 3 years ago. So when you think about, I'm quite passionate about data. I'm quite passionate about AI. And for many, many years, we spoke about it. And Pat, you and I, and Robin and I, we spoke about a lot about data. We spoke about good data and the importance for good data. And now we see in the industry, finally, everybody's talking about it. And finally, things are changing. So I'm really excited about it. I would even say, when you think about what is happening in the energy system today, when you think about how the grid is changing, when you think about how fast grid conditions are changing, without AI, we won't be able to operate the future grid. And without good data, we won't be able to use, implement, train the AI. So for me, it's extremely exciting times because we spoke so much about the importance of good data. And now we are all into the transition towards an AI native power grid. And that is driven by data. And that is just the fun part of our business. So I'm really happy to have both of you here in the call and we can chat about how to leverage data, how to build smart solutions, and I'm quite sure it's going to be big fun today.
Absolutely. And I think we'll get into the nitty gritty of data and the innovation and the integration that we've built. As the partner guy on the call, so my role, I lead strategic technology alliances for GE Vernova. So I have the privilege of partnering with Microsoft. I do want to just take a second to talk about how excited we are about this partnership and what we've launched here. So, I think when you think about what we're bringing together with GE Vernova and with Microsoft, you have the combination of Vernova's deep expertise in this space, right? We've been providing the technology that utilities use in the control room to run and operate the grid. We've been in that space for decades, right? And you combine that with the power of Microsoft's platform, as you mentioned, Pat, right? You guys have not just secure, scalable infrastructure, but a really powerful suite of data and AI tools that are, helping more people throughout all of these organizations innovate faster with data. Somebody like me who's not technical, right, can fire up Copilot and generate insights, build dashboards, right? So I think there's a lot of power when you bring those two things together. And as we've been establishing this partnership, Pat, you and I, we've had the chance to spend a lot of time together. So would love to get your perspective on, especially given you worked with both, right? You worked with GE, you worked in the space, now you're with Microsoft. What excites you about this partnership and what we'll be able to do together?
Yeah, well, I can't emphasize the importance of GE Vernova right now in the power utility sector. Your core platforms are so critical to keeping the lights on, and this is just me being very direct about it. You think about your ADMS technologies. You think about going back to our protection relays. All these technologies are just fundamental and crucial. But what's kind of interesting too, and what I know in speaking to a lot of the our utility leaders, what's keeping them at night is kind of the it's a new generation almost of workforce, right? You're going to see a lot of attrition. And to be honest, I was one of the few people that actually in my old organization that knew the GE Harris, the RTUs. And so, but as technology starts moving and migrating away, how do you retain that technology? How do you retain that deep-rooted expertise into all these things like programming, protection relays, looking at ADMS systems as well? And so, historically, before a new employee that kind of comes in, they're reading just manuals, non-stop standards and manuals. The new generation employees coming into as well, they don't actually read anymore too. So this becomes a bit of an interesting conundrum. AI and data is just such a powerful way now to bring information so quickly to a user. And this is what really kind of excites me. One of the biggest problems I'm hearing right across is really that workforce of the future. How do you unlock all these new employees coming in? How do you basically bridge the knowledge gap from all these employees that are leaving and exodus and organizations just based on retiring? And there's no other technology like Microsoft that can come in here and really help bridge that gap. So that is a very key, important thing. The other thing I'm going to really kind of mention here is how Microsoft really differentiates themselves across the board. Windows 95, I talk about Windows 95 all the time. People are like, why are you talking about it? Right? But if you think about it, think about it was the time where Microsoft demystified home computing. Thorsten, before Windows 95 came out, right? What were we doing? We're thinking Linux here and there, Lotus. Anyways, long story short, computing wasn't accessible to people, and Windows 95 completely bridged that gap. And where Microsoft really differentiates across all hyperscalers is that user experience. We know how to just take big, important technologies and simplify them and get them to the people that need it here. And so this is one thing that's also a high priority for Microsoft in their partnership with GE Vernova. You might have about 50 people who know the ADMS inside out, and they know how to operate it. They know how to use it. But that information needs to go to probably 5,000 people, 10,000 people. And this is where the Microsoft partnership with GE Vernova will allow that. We will get the information from your core and critical systems to all the people that need it. And it's not just these 50 people who have to understand the ADMS, sending data or information back and forth via emails. We'll just get that information to them point to point. So I'm only scratching the surface of really gets me excited. I haven't begun talking about AI yet and what we can do with AI use cases, right? But I'll leave that for maybe later on in the conversation.
Cool. And maybe I can just add something, Pat, to what you just said. It's about the workforce, but what I also think it's quite important, and that's why I'm excited about the partnership too, is when you think about the future grid and what we are seeing at the moment, we are seeing also that we are talking about, or we have to implement more and more integrated workflows. What I mean with that, the traditional utilities quite often siloed from an organizational point of view. When you think about planning, asset management, the enterprise functions, the operational systems, typically quite often still organized in a silo. But when you now think about the future grid, and we talk about the importance of real-time data to be able to orchestrate the grid in real time, then you need also an integrated environment. And that is exactly what excites me here, where we from GE Vernova are coming with domain expertise, where we are managing operational data, and then of course, where we can leverage everything you said, Pat, and I really loved when you spoke about Windows 95 and the user experience, because when you think about the future control room, it will be a completely different user experience in 5 or 10 years. I'm not saying it's going to be Windows 95, and I hope it's not Windows 95, but it has to be a completely different one. And that is really exciting about this partnership, that we now can build these smart, integrated workflows that are not only breaking data silos, but also organizational silos.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
I think, Thorsten, what you're talking about is something that I've heard talked about a lot, of the idea of the OT-IT divide, right? And I think that's an obvious area where Vernova and Microsoft partnering together can help. Would love to dive into that a little bit more, right? And Pat, maybe you can start by talking a little about, like, in the utility context, what are we really talking about if we're talking about this idea of the IT-OT divide?
Yeah. Look, my viewpoint on the OT-IT, we've always been talking about the divide, but now we also talk about the convergence. But even then, I feel like it's just a narrative, or it's just some type of a branding or excuse, basically, to not move quicker. OT and IT convergence, data itself. Who needs data? It's the business users at the end of the day as well, right? And the business users can pull data from all types of systems. The way our technology is now working is that we can mirror data, we can replicate data. We don't need to move everything to the cloud. And this is just me being transparent, right? But we have the capabilities right now just to take data from anywhere, whether it's on-prem, whether it's through a lot of GE Vernova's amazing applications. But we can actually take data and mirror it right off the bat and put it right into something simple as Copilot M365, chat against your data, Power BI, which I know a lot of the business users use it. The convergence has been here a long time ago as well. And the technology that we have right now, it bridges it over. And so, there is no divide. Being very clear, the divide is a perception. 1000% it's perception. The convergence as well is just a reality right now. It should be business as usual. And so we have the technology here. It's been here for a good while now. I know Microsoft and GE Vernova were partnering on us as well, and we'll probably talk about later, not to spoil it, how we're doing it together. But the convergence is here. It was here yesterday, and it's just really now about adoption. And via this adoption, what problems do we really want to solve? And so this is kind of my picture around this OT and IT landscape.
It's interesting, Pat, and sorry, Robin, for jumping in again. I had last year
I love it.
At Orchestrate. Orchestrate is our customer conference, and I was hosting a session on IT/OT, on the convergence. It was quite interesting because, of course, I had many utilities, experts joining in, and one guy would ask me in the beginning of my session, why are we sitting here? Why are we discussing IT, OT? It should be all integrated. That is, of course, not the best start when you are hosting a 90-minute session, because what to do. But the interesting thing is, and I totally agree, in the future, we might not think about IT, OT anymore like we do today. I totally understand it today because we have the operational technology. We have sensitive data. We have mission critical infrastructure where you, as you said, Pat, where we are really keeping the light on, where we are managing the grid. And then we have, of course, the IT side, the enterprise side. But when we think about it, what we said about 5 minutes ago, with these integrated smart workflows that we need to manage the future grid, where we are managing everything in real time, then there is, as you said, there is no real IT-OT divide anymore. It's more like different secured environments, policies, things like that. But we have to look at it from a unified view. And there is no doubt, there is no doubt that, of course, the challenges and what we are doing on the OT side, how we manage data, the data management challenges are maybe a little bit different, because on the OT side, we talk about grid-aware data. We talk about a huge amount of measurements, SCADA measurements, alarms, events. You talk about real-time things. You talk about data that must understand the context of the grid. On the IT side, you might think more about analytical aspects, financial aspects, asset-related. So there is not really a divide. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah. And to even augment this theme as well, right? For all the listeners right now watching the webinar, maybe some food for thought. Think about if you can get this piece of data from whatever critical device you need, what impact would you have for your customers? When I say customers, right, it's all the ratepayers, the people who need electricity as well. Can you improve an outage time by like an hour, 2 hours? Can you bring down your operational costs? And this is what we should be talking about. When you have critical pieces of data, especially unified critical pieces of data together, how are you transforming your entire business? This is the conversation we need to move towards, just beyond the OT and IT conversation. So, Thorsten, I'm glad that that person asked you that type of question because I think really this is solving the problem to me now. No longer talking about OT and IT divides and convergence. How are we going to improve the grid with this information we have?
Exactly. And that is funny because I also read somewhere, I think a week ago, because many times we would talk about, utilities, they lack data. No, they don't. They have enough data. The challenge is it's not set in context. They cannot use it. And that is what we are talking about here, making the data accessible across, now I'm still using it, IT, OT, but what we really talk about it in a unified, but of course secured way. And that is unlocking the real power when we are using the data, putting it in context across the entire environment in a secured way. And that is what we are talking about here.
Yeah, I love the phrase unified data environment. I think that's a great way to sort of explain what we're striving to build for customers with this partnership. So let's get into a little bit more of the technical side of things, right? And where does a data fabric fit into this picture? Where does cloud fit into this picture? Pat, you and I, we've worked to build sort of a visual to show what it looks like with the integration that we've built for customers. So, would love for you, Pat, maybe to start by just kind of walking through at a high level what the GridOS data fabric and Microsoft Fabric looks like, how it works together, and then Thorsten, share from your perspective what are some of the benefits, right, that we're bringing together to customers with this.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm still going to use this platform. Are we sharing the graphic right now, Robin? You have to kind of see it.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And where Microsoft kind of fits in here is, just give me 1 second. Apologies, all technical difficulties. I'm trying to figure out this platform myself and see what graphic is shown. Robin, just give me a quick thing. What graphic are we seeing right now?
I can walk folks through it. So what we have here is, the GridOS platform, and you have the data coming from the IT side of the house, the data coming from our own applications, external data, and we can persist that in our data fabric. And really the way I think of the GridOS data fabric is it's what allows GridOS applications to talk to one another. It provides a single sort of view and source of truth for the GE Vernova GridOS kind of core user, which is the person in the control room. But what we've done with this integration, right, is bridged that and connected that into the customer's IT environment. And in this case, specifically, when we're talking about the customer's IT environment, we're talking about everything that they can do with Microsoft Fabric. So you have, the suite of Microsoft Fabric tools that if you can securely give Microsoft Fabric users access to the data that is in our data fabric, all these possibilities open up. And, I think in addition to technical difficulties, one of the things Pat and I always struggle with is whose fabric are we talking about here? But we have the GridOS data fabric and Microsoft Fabric. And I like to joke, I've asked Microsoft to rename theirs so it's a little easier for our customers, but that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. So actually, I just had to click some boxes here and there too as well. But now I see the visual as well. And Robin really nailed it too. It is our fabric to fabric. I'm trying to push it for calling it fabric squared. This partnership as well. But long story short, when I talked about customer experience again and or user experience, this is Microsoft Fabric. The beauty of this tool is that you don't need to migrate all your data into cloud. We keep saying this again, right? The value of cloud itself is how can we just get insights, analytics? How do we just solve problems as fast as possible? And we decided that one of our strategies can be data mirroring. So your data can be residing in the GridOS fabric. You can be even using other cloud providers as well for where your data is being housed. But we will mirror it. We will virtualize it and mirror it. And this is the fastest way right now to collect all your data unified into one spot. And Thorsten, we kept talking about data unification, and that data coming together all up. This is the tool that's accelerated to do all this. Now, while you're basically unifying and mirroring all your data as well, you can run your typical analytics. You have access to Python. You can do machine learning. But what's also even more brilliant is Power BI. Most of the people in the utilities that I know of use Power BI. This is just the core data visualizer that's standard out there. And Power BI is integrated into Fabric. And if you really want to think about Fabric one level higher, it's real-time intelligence Power BI. Imagine now you can get data just coming through instantaneously if you want to, or in real time. This is the beauty of Fabric itself, and this is Fabric. Now, what is also really important is, and this this graphic that you're seeing here too, is this very bottom layer that I love to call the customer experience layer. And many people are beginning to use Copilot M365. Many utilities, when we actually go in and run surveys and talk to them, they actually say Copilot M365 is their gateway to AI. That's how they're starting. And with Fabric now, and the technology is improving, it will integrate with the Copilot M365. And so, don't view Copilot just as, hey, summarize an email for me, or write an email to my boss that'll make them like me more, like that type of stuff. We're way beyond this now, right? You can actually communicate with that data in Fabric, and even with the GE Vernova, we can mirror that data that GE Vernova has that is so critical. But now imagine you can now chat with Copilot M365 interface onto that GE Vernova crucial data sets. We can also export this all to Teams as well. And so if most people use Teams, this is another just user interface. And if we think about the user interface now, Copilot M365, Power BI, Teams into GE Vernova critical data. This is what this diagram is. It just took me a while to find it.
Yeah. Can I maybe add something, Pat? Because I liked really what you said. Sometimes when I talk about the data challenges for utilities, I would refer to my 80-80-80 challenge. And I'm quite sure most of the people have heard about it. 80% of AI pilots end up at the POC graveyard because of bad data. 80% of the time and efforts a data scientist is using is not on science, but on cleansing data. And the last 80% is dark data, meaning data that the utility has somewhere, but is not able to use. What you were talking about with the customer experience and what the Microsoft Fabric can add to the GridOS data fabric managing the operational system is indeed illuminating this 80% dark data, because you would use the Microsoft Fabric to create value out of combined data. And when I say combined data, I'm talking about operational data, meaning, as you already mentioned, data from the sensors, from ADMS, from SCADA, alarms, events, the data that is typically used to orchestrate the grid, and then setting this data into context with, and now I call it enterprise data, like asset, topology data, but also external data, weather data, things like that. And that is creating the huge, huge unlock. And that is also where I believe the big benefit is working together, having a kind of integrated environment, a unified approach to manage data. On the one side, you have the GridOS data fabric that is optimized, of course, for real-time use, because we are orchestrating the grid. So it's optimized to handle huge amount of data. It's optimized to manage measurements, alarms, and events. And it's optimized to do things quickly. So it's not just big data, it's also fast data. And now we put it into context of IT, enterprise IT, external data sources, and that is creating the real value I see. And then you said something. Sorry, please. Yeah.
I was gonna say, you know what words really pain me to hear? It's always data scrubbing, where it's like, oh, how much time are you spending to just scrub data? Just do it, use it, right? So it's really we call it, the way we view Fabric, it's data enablement, data empowerment. And I'll reinstate this again. The partnership with Vernova is so crucial because Microsoft, we will never be building an ADMS. We will never be building a DERM system. We will never be building these very specific domain expertise systems. This is GE Vernova's bread and butter. But where we can come in is really that data unlock, that user experience, all your day-to-day tools that you use, like once again, Teams and Copilot. We're gonna work with GE Vernova to basically just get that information out to your hands, to where you need to make decisions and run AI use cases, as they start coming up. And believe me, with the ADMS, there's an infinite amount of use cases we can do with AI. And AMI is my favorite type of topic too as well. We both have smart meter partnerships out there. Imagine now when we put them into the fold here, the massive power unlock here. So.
Yeah. And I want to add one more thing to what you said in the beginning, Pat, when you spoke about the workforce. When I think about the new generation of operators, and when I say operators, I mean the utility operators, planning, control room, things like that. These people are so used to a different kind of way of working and thinking. Now think about it. Their boss is coming and asking them for any kind of a risk assessment on given assets. And they easily can prompt now and use natural language, and they get almost the dashboards, the report on the fly. And that is exactly what our partnership enables here, because they can prompt, they can create on the fly analytics reports, whatever they need right here, right now, but combined operational data. And we all know when we speak with utilities, one of the biggest challenges has always been, how can I unlock my operational data? How can I get access? And we together have unlocked the data, and now they can really build these on-the-fly analytics. Think about it. That is changing the work. That's exciting. Oh, I could talk for hours about it.
Oh yeah, I think we have only 1 hour for the webinar. But
exactly. Yeah.
We should do a series.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
I saw in the chat, I saw a question that is quite interesting in the Q&A. There was a question about the interoperability of data. Are we using standards? Are we using SIM? Things like that. And I want to quickly go first, and then Pat, please add some information. So we, from GE Vernova, we are trying to use standards as much as possible. That means we are also, when we are contextualizing data, when we are building and putting the grid context on top of the data, we are using SIM to tag the data, to put data into context, because we are big believers in interoperability. And we are big believers that the energy transition is a team sport. That's why we are sitting here together today. And that means using standards, how to integrate data, how to make sense of data across different vendors is a must. So yes, we are using as much standards, and SIM is one of the standards we are using to annotate, to tag, and to set our operational data into context.
And where we come in, and I'll keep saying this again, GE Vernova has the point-to-point like domain expertise. As you leverage this and use this with your GridOS fabric, what we would do is take the most important insights from it and disseminate that across your organization. And that's where our fabric comes in. A new person coming into the workforce, they might not know IEC 61970 standards. They might not have the scope to even go into GE Vernova to play with the GridOS fabric as well. Where we come in is we actually allow them now access to take the data at least and run whatever they need to do, whether it's, once again, AI use cases, whether it's just your dashboard and reporting, whether they need to write a briefing note or whatever it is, right? We will help and augment GE Vernova to the rest of the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Maybe, Robin, before we move on, we should clarify one thing. When we talk about a fabric, what we really mean. Because there might be people that are not that used to the way, to fabric as a kind of concept. So when we talk about the data fabric, one of the important principles is we are talking about, or we are using the concepts of data federation and data virtualization. And that is extremely important in the context of a utility. That means you don't have to copy and redo all the data into a huge data lake. That is not what the data fabric is all about. Think a fabric more like a network of data sources with a unified access layer, with a unified ontology, with a unified API that makes it accessible. So don't think about a data fabric as the new data lake. No, it's not. Think more about it as a network of data buckets, a network of data sources, a data mesh architecture. And what we have done here is integrating these two fabric concepts into a unified approach to unlock exactly what Pat and I was talking about, to unlock these smart integrated workflows across the entire enterprise.
And if we were to take that one level deeper, so understanding what is a data fabric, a generic data fabric, right? And you kind of explain what that is. Why would a utility need two different data fabrics, right? Why would they need ours, GridOS data fabric, as well as Microsoft fabric? I think it's very easy, partly just because of the names, but also conceptually, I think it's easy to get maybe a little confused about why you might need both.
Maybe I go first this time, because on the sketch, I'm on the left side.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about your OT environment, think about your control room application, think about your operational applications. Typically, the old approach was, of course, you had a lot of fragmented systems. What we are doing with the GridOS data fabric, we have now built a data infrastructure. And as I mentioned, think about it as a network of data, but optimized for real-time use cases. Optimized for use cases where you need to understand what is a feeder, What is an asset? What is PMU data? That means and the GridOS data fabric is optimized for grid-aware, high-speed use cases that you typically would implement or need to orchestrate the grid in real time. So everything related to managing the grid, orchestrating the grid, where speed is a requirement, where you have to understand the context of the grid, that is where the GridOS data fabric is purpose-built for. What is also important is, of course, that a lot of those data I was talking about is typically sensitive data and quite often in your local data center as a utility. And that is the reason that we have built the GridOS data fabric as an infrastructure that is unlocking operational data from the operational systems and putting it in context of the grid. And then we are distributing or federating the information to make it available also for the Microsoft fabric. Make sense, Robin?
It does, yeah. And so then, Pat, what is Microsoft Fabric doing that we haven't designed our data fabric to do?
Yeah. So I don't think you folks will be building your own teams for the power utilities as well, or building your own co-pilot type of applications. But going back to the user experience, our fabric is just really we will leverage what Vernova has already done in our GridOS fabric and get it down to those platforms, those endpoint platforms. Now, at the same time, too, for the utilities that might have other CRM systems or some other type of systems out there that they leverage, right? We can actually connect into those systems as well and do the exact same thing, replicate that data, but now unify it with the GridOS as well. And so there's a lot of applications that are outside of Vernova's portfolio, and these are kind of the day-to-day type stuff. Even some finance applications here and there as well. But once again, when we can ever leverage, the data, unify this type of data from all these different sources together into one space via data mirroring. And Thorsten, you nailed it down. It's really the fabric, right? It's not migrate or anything like that. It's really the replication and the mirroring as well. Think of now the type of decisions you can make with that. And then a lot of times too, the beauty of our fabrics as well, you can like push and pull data back and forth, right? It's kind of a opportunity right now to just really unlock insights that you've never seen it before. And going back down to this diagram, that front end layer, anybody can use it. Anybody who has the rights or permissions can now access it as well. So it becomes a bit of a creative exercise, which is, hey, if I had Vernova data here and I had some finance data over here and I had some customer call center data over here too, what can we really do with all this in one spot now together? And so this becomes just transformational. It will take a creative mindset now to start thinking about this, but going back to when we talked about IT and OT convergence right now, let's not talk about IT and OT convergence anymore. Let's talk about if you have all these pieces of data together, what you can do here. How can you really solve big problems together?
Exactly.
So, as a layperson, is it fair to say our data fabric, GridOS data fabric, purpose-built for real-time operations running the grid, it comes with the context that you need to make sense of what's happening on the grid in real time, the security that you need to do that in real time, the speed to do all that in real time. That does not come out of the box with Microsoft Fabric, right? And then when you connect that into Microsoft Fabric, now you're extending that data that is kind of sitting inside the control room being used to run the grid, and you're giving people access to that data with the power of all the tools we see here on the screen, right? Power BI and Copilot, as well as that ability to join it with other data that lives outside of our data fabric to generate, new insights, essentially, right?
Oh, you nailed it, Rob.
Okay. Well, we spent enough time talking about this together, Pat, so I would hope I get it at this point.
So you're a thought leader
now. So let's actually make this like a little more concrete by talking about an actual GridOS application that, today sits on top of our data fabric, can run on Azure, and what I'm talking about is GridOS DDLR, so digital dynamic line rating. I think maybe to start with, just Thorsten, if you could introduce what is digital dynamic line rating, what does it do, and then we can talk a little bit more about kind of the data coming out of it and what this partnership unlocked. But maybe just to level set, what is GridOS DDLR?
Yeah, I make the short version because DDLR is such an interesting topic that could be a different webinar. So in short, it is an application, as you already said, Robin, a GridOS application that is unlocking hidden capacity in the transmission network. That means it is a solution that is, instead of deploying more and more physical sensors, it's using data. It's using operational data in combination with external data like weather data, temperature data, things like that. And then it's replacing the static line ratings with, let's call it almost real-time calculations. And DDLR is a solution that typically finds up to 30% hidden capacity. And that is a genius case when you think about it, because that is an application, and again, I got really excited about it, because it's an application where you are just using the data in a smart way. And now you can leverage the existing infrastructure and utilize it in a much smarter way. And that is a typical example for one of the applications Pat and I talked about, because it's using on the one side operational data, but then it's also using data, of course, external data sources, weather data, things like that. And it moves away from static rating to real-time calculations. And that is creating a huge unlock. It's just one of these examples.
And the other thing I really like about DDLR, right, is we built it to sit on top of GridOS data fabric. So what role does the GridOS data fabric play kind of underneath DDLR? What does that make possible?
The beauty of it is, when you think about what is GridOS and what is the GridOS data fabric. As I said, think about the GridOS data fabric and GridOS being a kind of orchestrated intelligence layer that integrates operational systems. Think about it like that. And that means whatever we are doing on the DDLR solution, whenever we are calculating the ratings and we manage and store them in the data fabric, they are automatically available for all of our other applications. And we can easily federate this data, of course, to a Microsoft fabric where any kind of a Power BI user can build additional intelligence on top of it. So using the data fabric means two things. On the one side, it simplifies the implementation of DDLR because all operational data is already put in context available. But on the other side also, it's easy then to feed the data back to EMS or other applications and to federate it wherever we see the possibility to create value. That is the huge benefit here.
So Pat, if we were to kind of, take this story, pick it up where Thorsten left off, right? And would love to understand a little bit more about kind of the art of the possible if you were to take some of this data, right, that's coming out of a GridOS application like DDLR. What are some of these possibilities that are available to you if you federate that data into Microsoft Fabric, right, and give other users, give data scientists, right, who again will never touch an application like DDLR, but know data, know modeling, right, know what the rest of the enterprise IT data landscape looks like. Like, what are some of the things that this unlocks?
Yeah, so I'm going to take one step back here too, and my job here is to really solve problems. And the fact that right now capacity is probably one of the biggest challenges out there. There's three ones I'm always solving for, right? The first one is capacity unlocking as much as we can. It's probably a little bit no surprise to people that there's a lot of demand for data centers, and Microsoft, we do a lot of data centers as well, just to meet our AI capabilities. And so capacity unlocking is just such a transformational use case that is crucial. And so the DDLR is such a fantastic tool right now to look at that capacity unlock. Second one, and this is another product we're partnering on to disruption repair, but extreme weather conditions, kind of a bit of an unfortunate use case. And the third one right now is a data unlock. And so going back to DDLR, this is such a important topic for even Microsoft itself. And this is one of the reasons why we're really verticalizing and doing a deeper dive and deeper niche into the power utility industry. We cannot be successful without the power utility industry right now. We cannot grow, we cannot scale. And so I love that DDLR is really the key example here. And so, you see an architecture slide here, but I want to kind of go back, and you're going to always hear from me, right? That user experience. One of the biggest things right now today is 8760 power flow. And so even running transmission interconnection studies and trying to figure out how do we, what are all the different factors that play into an 8760 power flow type of study. To be honest, I don't think DDLR type of applications get mapped into those studies. Even new technologies come out like superconductors, right? They don't get mapped into these type of studies. But now that GE Vernova has this fundamental information, this type of ontology in their GridOS fabric, if I was a transmission planner and really thinking about, okay, we'll have to run my 8260 power flow studies on my typical technologies right now, right? And so I won't name the other ones, but they have their traditional legacy type of applications to run this type of study. Imagine now if we can actually bring DDLR into the other data from these interconnection studies, applications, things. You're going to actually find, is the way we're evaluating capacity not the true way to do it anymore, because there's real-time capacity unlock. If you're getting this type of data and it's just such fast real-time insights, well, holy smokes, maybe there's an entire block of the capacity we just have not figured out. Now let's start stacking on things like weather forecasting now, right? A lot of utilities right now, they purchase a lot of weather data. Microsoft, we're doing a lot of stuff with our own weather, with MSN weather. But now if you can get this like real-time type of weather information now, plus DDLR, plus what you're pulling out of these legacy systems, plus, hey, let's take a look what's going on at our AMI data level, right? Too. Let's take a look on a daily basis, because hey, guess what? We can actually replicate all the data now, create the proper ontologies, and see how they feed into systems. Let's take a look how AMI factors into it as well. Hey, let's take a look at even the velocity of our interconnection applications coming in and see what trends there are. So I'm pretty confident in the way interconnections. I used to look at a little bit of this stuff too. All the application velocity sits in a SharePoint drive, but do they track? Hey, what's the velocity of a specific segment, right? Take data centers. How many applications are coming through? What is the capacity that's needed? Hey, by DDLR, they can unlock a block, a block of it as well. What could that look like in terms of the interconnection process? Can we actually connect more load onto the grid? And we completely reimagine what worst case scenario could look like, because this DDLR is guaranteeing a block of capacity at times that we need it. This is just the new way of thinking about capacity altogether. And I'm just scratching the surface. When you have the data insights you need and you start correlating more information together, this becomes just a transformational now way of looking at unlocking capacity.
That's, I think, a great note to end our session of the